Dear friends, welcome to another episode in the fantastic world of the military. In this video, we will talk about nuclear weapons in space and the alleged intention of Putin to do so, which is seen as a serious risk to the national security of the United States. If you're not subscribed to the channel yet, subscribe now and activate the notification bell to not miss any updates. Last Wednesday, February 14th, the intelligence sector of the United States Congress released a rather unusual note, referring to a threat classified as a serious risk to national security, urging President Biden to declassify and make it public. Security reports and alerts are relatively common, but are always handled very discreetly and secretly. Therefore, the request for the alert to be declassified and made public attracted everyone's attention. Shortly after, several news sources began to report that this security alert was related to Russia, more specifically with a threat from Russia in space. In a quick press conference, Jake Sullivan, National Security Advisor of the United States, did not provide details about the threat. But many newspapers, citing sources linked to Congress and the White House, reported that the nature of the threat would be Vladimir Putin's intention to place nuclear weapons in orbit. In a world where Russia and the United States each have over 6,000 nuclear warheads, why is the placement of nuclear weapons in orbit seen as a serious threat to the national security of the United States? As is widely known, for many decades space has become a participant in conflicts on the planet, with major powers using space to support aerial, land, and naval operations, mainly through communication and the supply of important intelligence data, such as photos, showing the strength and disposition of the enemy. In the case of the Russian invasion of Ukraine, despite the Ukrainians not having military satellites, they are obtaining daily information from the extensive network of military satellites of the United States and allied nations, such as the United Kingdom. Through this information, Ukraine is able to select and target important Russian assets, such as air defense launchers and vessels anchored in ports and military bases. Thanks to these satellites, the Ukrainians have attacked and destroyed highly valuable Russian equipment, something that, as you can imagine, deeply bothers Russia. However, despite this important military support role, space has never become a battlefield, and in fact, even at the height of the Cold War and the space race, the United States and the Soviet Union never exchanged gunfire or aggression in space. In 1967, the Outer Space Treaty was signed, aiming to ban the use of nuclear weapons in space. However, the treaty did not prohibit the use of non-nuclear conventional weapons. As in the 1960s, the concept of a space station was beginning to emerge, with many plans and projects in the United States and the Soviet Union. The greatest fear was the construction of large orbital platforms for launching nuclear missiles against ground targets, with that 1967 treaty preventing this. Today, in 2024, this fear still exists. However, there is another equally serious one involving the use of nuclear weapons against military satellites, which, as I mentioned earlier, play an increasingly important role in modern conflicts, thus turning these satellites into highly prioritized targets. But what is the advantage of using nuclear weapons, which, as I said, are banned from being used in space? Why not simply use conventional weapons, such as projectile launchers in orbit? The distances between objects are enormous, and satellites in low Earth orbit travel at staggering speeds, which can be almost 18,000 miles per hour. This means that, to hit a satellite with conventional weapons, there are only two options. The first is to launch a missile from land, air, or sea, with that missile rising for hundreds of miles until it hits the target satellite. This is a highly complex operation, as the objective in practice is to hit a small object flying at almost 18,000 miles per hour, with another smaller object also flying at 18,000 miles per hour. Even with all current computational systems, this is a complex operation, with many chances of missing the target. The other option involves the use of an attack spacecraft, however, only to approach a target satellite. This spacecraft would consume almost all of its fuel, making it impossible to reuse in other attacks. Furthermore, as soon as it is detected on land that a spacecraft is maneuvering in orbit to attack satellites, anti-satellite missiles would be launched to shoot it down. However, if the aggressor nation uses nuclear weapons, the aggrieved country may not have time to react for several reasons. In the atmosphere, one of the most terrible effects of a nuclear explosion is the gigantic displacement of air from the shockwave. Depending on the bomb's power, Winds at hypersonic speeds and temperatures of thousands of degrees destroy and devastate everything in a radius that can be several miles around the epicenter. But in space, as there is no atmosphere, this displacement of air does not exist, with the main effect of a nuclear detonation in space being heat and mainly the electromagnetic pulse. A high-power nuclear detonation, if carried out in a crowded and full orbital path, with satellites relatively close to each other, is capable of emitting an electromagnetic pulse with the potential to fry the electronic circuits of everything within hundreds of miles. Furthermore, this electromagnetic pulse also affects what is on the ground, destroying electronic circuits and seriously affecting communications. Critical defense systems usually have shields that protect them from electromagnetic pulses, but units deployed on the ground would lose all of their communication means, thus having the potential to leave entire armies authentically blind, deaf, and dumb. A high-power nuclear warhead, if detonated 248 miles above the Earth's surface, is capable of generating an electromagnetic pulse strong enough to affect electronic equipment within a radius of several hundred or even thousands of miles. In other words, only a handful of nuclear bombs would be enough to destroy a large part of the satellites in orbit and, at the same time, render virtually all electronic and communication systems on the ground useless in countries like the United States. In a scenario involving this type of attack, armies on the ground, even the most modern ones, would be catapulted into the 19th century, with millions of civilians thrown into complete chaos, without electricity, communication, and adequate means of support. Therefore, if Vladimir Putin has the same intention of placing nuclear weapons in orbit, it is clearly a major threat to security, not only to the United States, but to the entire planet. And if you are not yet subscribed to the channel, subscribe and activate the notification bell to not miss any news, criticisms, ideas, or suggestions. You can leave them in the comments.